Hello, and welcome to another wonderful Wednesday webinar. We have wisdom being dispensed this week by Karen Leach, who has been helping run the warehouse in Birmingham, which is a Friends of the Earth space, but it helps many different groups and is a space for lots of different groups and projects to meet and organise and get together, which is what we're seeing with many of the climate emergency centres. Really good to see lots of groups using spaces. So Karen's come to share her knowledge with us today about many years, 1977, I think. I read some of you started. So over to you, Karen. Tell us about the journey and the learnings. Over. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Phoenix. Okay, I've got some photographs mainly, not actual slides as in words. But as Phoenix said, let me just see if I can get those up without it hovering over the wrong thing. There we go. CEC presentation. I'm Karen Leach. I'm on the staff here at Birmingham Friends of the Earth. I walked into, why is it not showing the, from beginning, thank you. It's one of those very unresponsive mice. Here we go, better. I walked into the warehouse building in 1996 and I immediately loved it. The kind of the scruffiness, the disorganization, the busyness, the posters and banners everywhere with all sorts of slogans, the people arguing in corners about important things, the many cups of tea, it just all the different sorts of people and stuff going on, and I just loved it. I've done various roles involved since then. I started off with campaigns volunteering, and then I got a paid campaigns role, which I was really pleased about. They're few and far between. And then I started renting an office with another organisation that was a tenant here. And then I joined the board, and now I'm sort of in charge on the staff body, and I still absolutely love it. The warehouse then, it's run by Birmingham Friends of the Earth as a place for people to come together to take climate action and to fight injustice. It's in Digbeth, which, if you don't know, Birmingham is very close to, well, our end of Digbeth is very close to the city centre, so it's fantastically central, but also enough out of the way that when they bought it, the prices were cheap. And the HS2 station is going to be right next door to us, so we've campaigned against it a lot, but it's possible that at some stage we'll benefit from it. We're still campaigning against it though. Anyway, building is home to our campaigns activity, and that of many other groups, and that we hire out meeting space and hire out office spaces as well, which are used by a community of organisations that share our values in some way. So there's a couple of retailers, but also non-profits and charities, and some of them are socially orientated and some of them environmental, and a full range. We rent out meeting space at different costs, from free to full rate, depending on the organisation and the situation. We've also got a fantastic bicycle shop and a fantastic bookshop. So if you didn't have a reason to visit Birmingham before, now you have them. And the bookshop is particularly worth a browse. And we have also our fantastic cafe. Now, sadly, this is actually closed at the moment. The previous operator closed a year ago, pretty much to the day. Which was really sad, but they were just overwhelmed by the pandemic and then the cost of living crisis, and they just ran out of energy. So we've been looking for a new operator for our cafe. But in the meantime, we've been using the space to host all sorts of really interesting events that we couldn't have hosted before because it's our biggest space in the building. So actually, it's been quite good for us in some ways, and it's brought a different crowd to the building that we didn't have before. So definitely a good, a good plan B, as it were. And finally, we have a wonderful wildlife garden, which has beehives and herb spiral, pond, pizza oven, stage, compost toilets, newly, and a 3-bay hot composting system, which takes all of our food waste, even the cafes when it's open. So there's a lot going on here. Friends of the Earth is an in case anybody doesn't know, is an environmental campaigning organisation with a strong focus on environmental justice and branches all over the world, from Birmingham to England to Germany to Palestine. Local groups are fairly autonomous, so we can usually choose what we focus on as a group within a few guidelines. We have 4 mostly part-time members of staff. Our only full-time member of staff is our campaigner, so that's kind of a good thing. And we have, obviously, like all of us, lots of volunteers involved as well. Friends of the Earth Birmingham first moved in to the warehouse in 1977, as Phoenix mentioned in his introduction. It was constituted as a community benefit society, which is a type of cooperative. And of course, that means that we're owned by our members, and the principles and values of that matter to us, and the way that we try to operate. Friends of the Earth local groups at the time were involved in a lot of practical projects that were really innovative for their time. Home insulation projects and recycling projects, whole food retailing and that sort of thing that people weren't really doing. So the warehouse became an incubator for a lot of those, and that's why they wanted to get a building. And many of those enterprises are actually still in existence today. I don't know if that Morris Minor is still in existence, but some of these companies are. The warehouse has always relied hugely on volunteers. Back in the day, of course, there were many fewer issues with health and safety, and we hear a lot of frightening stories about how they put in RSJs with no sort of structural support, and just a bit of a sort of tap with a hammer and a stroke of luck and things like that. It's putting roof gardens onto roofs that weren't structurally sound enough, and various other terrifying stories. Today, we still rely hugely on volunteers for the building as well as for campaigns. And they do a lot of our basic maintenance. And Richard, who's the guy with the paint on his nose on the right, is that black bar, by the way, across the screen for everybody or just for me?
No, can't see it.
Oh, good. Excellent.
I love Richard the Bodger. That's brilliant.
Well, he's the guy that tells us all these stories about how it used to be, because he was the first person to cross the threshold when we started renting the building in 1977. And he very recently, just this year, came back to do some maintenance volunteering. So it's really nice to have him back. But in 2016, we had some ambitions that were a bit beyond volunteer labour, and we decided to raise £240,000 through a crowdfunder and a community share offer to refurbish the building. And the aims of that were to make more of our space usable and increase disability access and make it more energy efficient. It was we were successful in raising the funds. We brought in a social enterprise to do the building work. And it was a really, really hard few years. So definitely some lessons about how not to do things from that. And of course, just as we were recovering, we had one decent year of starting to rebuild our business, and some of our tenants doing the same, when the pandemic struck, and then the cost of living crisis. So we've had a rocky time. But we're sort of through it now, and the refurbishment that we did is starting to pay off. We're seeing it's been fantastic, because it's really enabled us to earn more money, but to meet our aims, but also to be much more inclusive and expansive about the sorts of groups and activities that we can host. So it's been a great learning curve, should we say? Now, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, that's good, because my screen stopped reacting for a bit and I wasn't quite sure why. Campaigning, of course, has been another constant here for all of those years. We had a rainforests campaign, like a lot of other organisations, back in, I think it was 80s and 90s, was it? And this fantastic inflatable chainsaw was put on the roof where it was visible from the nearby city centre station. So that was quite impressive. This was way before my time, by the way. And we've also campaigned on energy, transport, wildlife, recycling, pollution, food, and so on. And we've had some successes, although, of course, the direction of travel couldn't be said to be altogether positive. So now, Friends of the Earth Birmingham is still campaigning on corporate responsibility, climate change, warm homes. We've got a very active warm homes campaign. But it's also really important to us that we're here for other organisations, from Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil to the National Trust and everything in between. And that's one of the things that I love about the place, is the mix of people that it brings in. We've always provided space for other groups, but going further than that, it's also really important to us that we're what they call in jargon intersectional, so wanting to support other causes around justice and not just focusing on environment. Back in the day, we were also a home to CND and sexual violence support groups and things like that. And now we're hosting a lot of Black activist groups and mental health support, pride sort of fringe events and Palestine fundraisers and so on. So that sort of brings me to the CEC network and our role as a climate emergency centre. When we heard about the CEC network, it was immediately obvious to us that this was a role that we were providing already, not without having to go through the process of finding a place that we could get a meanwhile lease on. We were already a space for all sorts of green activists to connect and to have solidarity with each other, a space for sort of collective and also separate activity, so that we can work together when it's useful, but we can also act separately. Repair cafes, socials, discussions, bike repair, meetings, good books, cake, tea, etc. So we thought we'd join the CEC network and share our experience with other groups and also to learn from them. And then we heard that local Extinction Rebellion activists, who we liaised with quite a lot closely already, and they were already meeting in our building, and they were thinking about starting a CEC in Birmingham. We kind of said, hang on a minute, that's what we're already doing, just let's just work together. And everybody's been happy with that, and that's worked really well. I mean, it's very early days, but I suppose there's positives and negatives from having a pre-existing CEC, because there's perhaps cultures around an existing organisation that you need to challenge yourself to allow other people in, if you see what I mean. And we have to work hard to make sure that we really keep it as a shared resource for all of the groups and not just for us. It's not just them paying us for meeting space. It's got to be a more collective and holistic relationship than that. But of course, the advantage for Extinction Rebellion is, and other groups involved, is that they can really focus on what they do well, which is campaigning. And they are wonderful, our local XR activists, and also Green Party activists the same way. You know, they need time to focus on what they're doing and not to get distracted by building and tedious insurance policies and roof leaks and things like this. So far we've run some joint activities, some green socials and some climate cafes, and we're planning a repair cafe. And we're talking about some display information and space in the cafe for climate activism when it does reopen, which is hopefully soon. So some thoughts of mine on getting a building if you don't already have one. I think the first thing I'd say is, do you definitely want to, and are you ready for the workload? Because you do have to, like I sort of hinted at earlier with the XR campaigners, you have to make sure it's not going to distract you from climate campaigning, and that it's going to help instead. You know, today I've spent much of my day dealing with repair people for a broken roller shutter and trying to fix a toilet, and I'm meant to have a strategic role. So, this is what happens when you have a building. And also, just the writing of policies and the getting of insurance and so on and so forth, and all of the health and safety and compliance issues. So you have to be sure you want to do that and you've got the capacity to do it. But of course, having a space is fantastic, and there's no denying that. And I think if it's I can see there's a use to having a short-term space, because you can then suck it and see and decide if you like it and what you gain from it. But also, obviously, having a long-term space really does build your long-term resilience as a group. And you know, it's quite likely that if we didn't have a building, Birmingham Friends of the Earth group wouldn't exist. There's quite a lot of other Friends of the Earth groups across the country that have folded, and we might well have done the same. So yeah, some thoughts around that. It's easy to make this all sound kind of brilliant and self-satisfied about it, but of course the real test is if we're contributing enough as to play our role in stopping the climate crisis, well, the environmental crisis, I should say. And although you can never quite feel you're doing enough, I think the fact that we have this space that's here for all groups to seek change in so many different ways, and we can run these activities and events so that we can connect meaningfully with each other and have solidarity and connection and community and fun. All of that does mean that I think having this building in the city does feel like a good contribution to the struggle in this area. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I mean, to me, the CEC network is most useful when it focuses on the practical skills that we need to do these things. So I was thinking the rest of the time we can spend learning from each other, perhaps how to show presentations on Zoom, but possibly more useful things as well. And I'm sure there's other people out there with experience that we can learn from, as well as vice versa. So that's kind of all I've got to say. I'd love to know where people are from if they haven't put it on their chat already, but I think that's the end of my presentation. And I'm going to try and unshare my screen now.
Brilliant.
Oh, you stopped it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was amazing. That's a wealth of knowledge and experience, and just, you know, the joy, you know, and the energy comes through, and just the description of so many things that you've done there with that building. I really empathise there. I think your opening one about the joy of seeing people in corners chatting and cups of tea and people meeting and the placards, you know, just to see a building fill up with life and activity is a joyous thing to me. It's one of the reasons we've been setting up centres for 30 years. And yeah, I'm so glad you've come and shared your knowledge, because there's many of these groups that are new to this, or some on the network that have been doing it for years, like Colchester, Northampton, Birmingham. I think there's one other that's been there a long time. But many of these groups are new. So over to the folks here, because we wanted, you know, feedback, discussion. Some of you have got centres, some of you haven't got centres. But if you want to ask a question, there we go. Lisa's Colchester, first off the board, University Challenge.
So it's interesting because you say that we've been doing it for years. So we have and we haven't. We haven't been successful. So I mean, it's a bit tricky. My perspective and Adam's perspective are different. So the Colchester Leaf Centre is only about 18 months old. Previous to that, we had a sort of drop-in centre, but it didn't really work. Anyway, my question to Karen is, what structure do you have to oversee and run and manage the place? You mentioned volunteers, and obviously you're a paid officer or someone. But who, you know, how do you meet? Who makes the decisions, and where does the funds come from? So that's quite a lot of questions.
Yeah, okay. So we are a community benefit society, being a type of cooperative. So that means that in terms of the structure, you know, that forms that, we have a board of directors who are elected by our members. Okay. Our membership is really wide, and I was going to say quite random, which sounds like an insult, but I suppose what I mean is there's people that have been involved that have got a share in Birmingham Friends of the Earth who've been members for decades, and they don't really have much to do with it now, but they'll just sort of keep supporting us and, you know, participate in the community share offer, but not really have much involvement. And then there's other people who are really new and still active, involved in the campaigns group and that sort of thing. So the membership's really broad. So then, yeah, board of directors, members. We've also got our campaigns group is almost like slightly separate. It's almost like a subgroup of the organisation, and there's the campaigners meet every Monday night, either online or in person, and do their campaigning, so that they make their own decisions about what they campaign on. I mean, technically the board could say, no, we don't want you to do that, but that's never happened because we trust the campaigners, and they, like most people, if you leave them to get on with it, they make sensible decisions about what they campaign on. So the board's very hands-off about campaigns. Then we have staff. So I'm the chief executive, which is a ridiculously pretentious job title for an organisation with 4 members of staff, but I did not choose that. And I liaise with the board, and they, you know, obviously I take my direction from them, or at least that's the theory. And then I manage the 3 other members of staff, and the campaigners kind of, you know, work with whoever is relevant. So our campaigner our paid campaigner will work directly with campaigns volunteers, and I sort of work with maintenance volunteers. So that's the structure bit, if that answers that question. And then in terms of funding, well, originally, apparently, to buy the building, it was a few people, because of course property prices were really cheap then, and I do appreciate that things are so much harder now if you haven't got a building and you want one permanently. It's possible, but it's a lot harder. So, you know, a few people put in, you know, £1,000 each, and they bought it for God knows how little, but you don't really want to think about it. And then I think they were just trying to pay that off, and they needed a bit more. And the West Midlands County Council was closing at the time. This was after they'd moved in. They'd been leasing it for a bit, and then they bought it outright. And somebody, the story is,
just excuse me 1 second. I have a dog who's desperate to go out in the garden. Bear with me. Sorry.
Well, I'll finish the story because it's only a daft one. But somebody apparently turned up on a motorbike with a cheque for £3,000 and said, "Bank that before 3 o'clock today." And that was the and therefore they managed to buy the building with that. I don't know how true that story is, but I quite like it. So basically it was just the county council trying to spend all of the money rather than giving it back to the government before they were closed down. So on their last day, lots of community organisations got a freebie, which is quite nice. Some rebel there that managed to organise that. So yeah, that was how the money was raised originally. Then of course we raised funds for the refurb through this community share offer, which was supported by, you know, the booster programme, and we've got sort of match from Co-ops UK and so on. So that's worked really well for us, and that's still going, isn't it? So I think there must be groups thinking about taking part in that. But our running costs are covered by our enterprise, so it really works as a model. We rent out this meeting space, we rent out offices, and what everybody pays for that, even though we keep our costs as affordable as we can, that does actually cover the costs of staffing. And we're now actually at a point, this is the first year that we're actually able to start allowing people to have withdrawals of the capital that they put in for the refurb, because of course it was all blown off kilter by the pandemic and the cost of living crisis. But now we're really, you know, it's working for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you, Karen. And
I think just to say a tiny bit more, I think in terms of other groups having spaces, I think renting meeting space to similar organisations who might be paying some quite corporate venue at the moment is a really good way to go, because they'll want to support you. That's what we find. They want to meet here. People like the National Trust want to meet here because they know it's supporting our work as well.
Okay, interesting.
I think Dinah was next. There's so much useful information there, Karen. Thank you. Dinah.
You're on mute, Dinah.
Do you have a scale of how you charge people? Because we were thinking about renting out our rooms to groups, but in the end, we just let them use it, which is a bit daft, really. So do you know, it's just so complicated to work out how to charge groups who don't have a lot of funding. It's like, oh, what do you do? Just give us a donation. But that's not really sustainable going forward, you know, because we don't want to fold. So we should have some kind of a plan.
Yeah, really good point, Dinah. And I think one of the things that I think I put this on a slide and then forgot to mention it, but it's good to be as generous as you can afford to be with your space, because that just brings people to you and makes friends and supports other causes. And, you know, it's one of the reasons why you're doing what you're doing. So it's great to be able to do that. But yeah, you completely need to think about the costs, your really full costs of of what you're doing. We have a sliding scale. It's not very sophisticated, and it's very much, you know, finger in the air pricing, I suppose. But we have nearly all organisations would fit into the top tier, the standard tier, and I do think we could possibly have an extra tier here. But if you have basically 2 members of staff or fewer, then you're in our middle rate. And if you have no paid staff and no funding at all, so you're just a voluntary group like the local Extinction Rebellion, or there's a group that was doing improv comedy that was just sort of funded by, you know, people who'd stick a pound in a pot or whatever, then they pay our lowest rate. And that is, you know, that rate is significantly lower than anything else that you'd get. We do also sometimes let groups meet for free. So anything that we do collectively under the CEC banner is free, but that kind of makes sense, obviously, because it's partly our activity. But also, if it's a fundraiser or just a group that's just starting and we really want to support them and we know that they haven't got any budget at all, then we'll quite often, and perhaps it's a group from an area or of a set of people who have no unlikely to have much spare cash, then we'll make sure that we give them space for free.
That's a really interesting one. I think Simon, Dinah, did you want to come back on that? And then Simon's got a comment, I think, and Lisa. Just to say a little bit from our end, we've always had low cost spaces, and you know, the first climate emergency centre was, you know, rent free, and we got to, you know, help with the electric a bit, and basically it meant that, you know, we could offer things on a sliding scale, is what we used to call it. But it's nice to see your tiers there and how you do it, and it is always nice actually to formalise it in some way so that you do have a rate card of low, medium, and higher tier. And I like to wonder voluntary or whether they've got paid staff. Simon, did you want to say stuff about? I was wondering about our future leads, and say a little bit. You were commenting there in the chat.
Yeah, I'm just mid cooking, but there's nothing that's going to burn. Yeah, that's really useful, and I'm glad I joined tonight's call, because it's like all the boring stuff that's like the admin side of stuff that I guess is a big part of my responsibility at the Leeds Centre. So that's what I'm really interested in. So yeah, the sliding scale is really good to know. When we ran our first space, we just did it as either you getting it for free or you're paying the sort of suggested donation rate. And we'd for the next space that we get into, we're definitely going to have more rates, because yeah, some of the people that use the space could clearly pay, you know, a lot more than others. So yeah, that's really good to know. But yeah, for us, because we don't own the building that we're in, we just have to be careful about the wording that the hire is like on a donation basis, because we're getting rates relief from the council, so need to be careful about sort of generating income, generating revenue when we're using the space.
That's interesting, Simon. We have the mandatory business rates relief. So is it 70%? I think, but not the full 100%.
I think it's 80.
Something like that. Is it 80? I should know, but so we have the we don't have the sort of the top up discretionary part of it, and it's certainly never stopped us from trading as a social enterprise that we have that mandatory relief, because we're a social enterprise, so they're fine with that anyway, and they're fine with the fact that we trade. But yes, I can see that if you're meant to be sort of fully charitable, really, aren't you, in some way to qualify for 100%. So I can see why you'd need to be a bit more careful there. There's pros and cons to being charities all of the time.
I think there's, you know, that this needs further research and things, because charities and not-for-profits get relief on the business rates, but you are allowed to generate money as a charity, as a not-for-profit, and to pay, you know, particularly not-for-profits pay for a director. I'm wondering what Worthing do. I think Helen's got a hand up there over the Leeds Centre. Helen?
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether also if you're renting it for a peppercorn rate or not at all, aren't you? So it depends on the contract you've got, probably, with whoever owns the building.
Yeah, although, like, because I've just looked at heads of terms we've got for the next space, it says we can't like sort of lease it to anyone else, but someone using a meeting room or an event space for a few hours isn't going to contravene that, is it? It's not actually like having a sublease or another license. So
I'm pretty sure that you'll be okay with that one in terms of I've learned through doing this role that there's a massive difference legally between leasing and hiring space in other ways. So that, for example, none of our tenants are on a lease; they're all on licenses, license to occupy, which obviously isn't subject to the same. You're probably not prevented from doing that. I mean, it might be worth checking exactly what the fine print says, but you probably can hire space out and even have a license to occupy for somebody.
Yeah, I think Linda's pretty good on some of this stuff. She did a lot of the negotiating on our leases. I'll come over to Sean, but just to say, you can generate money from hiring out space on a few hours or even a few days of the main hall or something without it being a license. But some leases say you absolutely can't sublet it at all or sublease it, but licenses are different. If they're exempt from landlord and tenant, you may be able to do that. Depends on the negotiations over the building at the beginning. If you can say, we want to do this to a few groups, is it possible to grant licenses rather than any kind of lease? But we all help each other with those things. Sean, and then Lisa, and I think Dinah was number 3.
Yeah, I'm just going to say we're a charity, and we got a formal lease, but we don't pay any rent. We pay sort of peppercorn rent, and it's not really. We do rent space out. We don't make a lot of money from it, but we do when the council have meetings in there, and we charge them. I think we've got 3 rates that we charge depending on the turnover of the organisation. We're not trading, and we don't really make a lot of money other than from donations and grants. But we did. We were put off. We wanted to open a cafe originally, and there's about 8 cafes within about 50 yards of our place in the high street. So all there is in Worthing now is cafes and hairdressers, I think. But we won grant. I think it was a national lottery. Said that if we opened a cafe, they wouldn't entertain giving us any money because we were unfair. We would be seen as unfairly competing with local traders. So yeah, that's worth noting. I mean, I'm not sure if that's widespread, but it's certainly a national lottery policy.
Yeah, I've come across this one a little bit as well, not quite as badly as that, and that's quite worrying actually. But we're involved in this compost culture project, which is all about spreading community composting around the city, and it's been brilliant. But one of the things that they said was, the National Lottery said, is that we can't compost our cafe's waste because that gives our cafe an unfair competitive advantage. So I think it's a bit of an issue for the National Lottery.
Curious.
Just sneak the odd banana peel in there, and they won't know.
Absolutely.
Lisa, have you got one there?
Yeah, sure. Just wondering how groups find out about you, and how to hire the space. So how do you promote yourself?
Well, there's the obvious social media, which I don't know quite how effective that is. We definitely make sure that.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Somebody is at my door now. Just carry on, please. It's really one of those nights. I just beg your pardon.
It seems a bit of a shame to answer her question when she's not here.
Maybe I can ask you something, and then when she comes back, they're just. Yeah. Sharing of documents is something we want to encourage more around the network and things. So, things like somebody from Durham, Fiona from Durham, was asking on the WhatsApp chat, which I'll put in a minute, about, anyone got a volunteer agreement and things like that. We're trying to accelerate, not reinventing the wheel, because lots of new groups getting a building have to go through these, bits of intense paperwork, from health and safety to where do I find insurance to, volunteer document stuff. So if there's any of those you'd be up for sharing with the network, that would be fantastic. Any of the longer term existing groups. You know, you've been going for a long time there. Do you get funds as well from Friends of the Earth Central? And
not as such. Just to answer on the policies, and Lisa, I'm going to come back to your question in a sec because we didn't think we should answer it when you weren't here. But yeah, on the policies and procedures and stuff, I have to say we still have some significant gaps because I think during the community share planning process, and then the pandemic when we were all furloughed, and then the cost of living crisis, it's just been a little bit difficult to keep on top of everything. So I suppose, well, yeah, last year I started to really get to grips with some stuff and updates and policies. But of course, things change all the time with these policies and procedures. So you suddenly find out that you're not doing something you should have been doing. And we've definitely got some significant gaps. If you ask me for my GDPR policy, I'll just run away because that definitely isn't. I don't think our practices are too bad, but in terms of a written procedure and policy for it, it's rubbish. So there's always something. But yeah, we're more than happy to. I think it's probably best if people ask directly for things that they're interested in. We're happy to share, and I'd imagine other groups are the same. So maybe that's something you can do on the Slack. What was the other question, Phoenix? It was about funds from national.
Just you've done a lot of fundraising there, it seems. Also, Community Benefit Society, one of them ones was a share offer. Do people get a small percentage back, but it's like a community small percentage?
That's right. This year is the first year we've been able to pay interest on people's shares. So we're starting off with a slightly measly 1%. Which didn't sound so bad before the interest rates went up so high. But anyway, we're starting off with that and we'll increase it. But people will be withdrawing some shares as well, because we'd rather prioritise paying back people than paying interest. But yeah, that's how that all works. In terms of national, they put some money into our community share offer, which we were really grateful for, just to have their kind of in principle support really as much as the funds themselves, because I think national tend to forget that we're here as a local group with a slightly different model from all of the others. Most local groups just have 4 people that meet in a pub or something, so they tend to need reminding that hello, we're this brilliant resource here. So they put some money into that, and they are also a tenant of ours, so we rent space to them, desks for their regional coordinator and that sort of thing, other staff that are based locally.
Cool. Maybe back to Lisa's question, and we'll have a few more.
Yeah, how do people hear about us? I mean, it's a bit difficult to compare in a way because we've been doing it for so long, and we even before the refurb we had meeting space, so we kind of had this mailing list of people who'd been meeting here forever, and we just sort of kept in touch with that. But having said that, we did recently, because like everybody else during the pandemic, it kind of business just dropped like a stone, even after the lockdowns and things. So we did a bit of work on kind of rebuilding that. And one of the things we did was just found lists wherever we could of every social and environmental organisation and charity in the city, and then wrote to them by email saying, hello, did you know we're here?
Yeah.
This is the resource we've got. Would you like to meet here?
Yeah.
And they were all really interested. Well, they weren't all obviously, but we got more responses than we expected from people saying, thanks, I'm definitely filing that for future reference, and what are your rates and things like that. So it did get a good response doing that. And obviously, you can sell your own cause in that message in terms of, if you do meet with us, not only is it affordable for you, but it's also supporting our work. So yeah, that's worked well. And then obviously social media, as you do, and making sure you ask for permission to keep the details of people that book with you, and then you can email them again. And so we just have a regular list of meeting room users, and every 6 months or so we email them and say, hi, we're here, do you need any meeting rooms? Here's what's new. We've got a new conferencing facility or something like that. And that works well.
Thank you.
I'll just say as well, actually, the solidarity social, the green solidarity socials are also really good for that sort of thing. So if you have a social event and people come along, you just get chatting and people will say, oh yeah, I've got this drama group that's been looking for somewhere to meet, you know, and it's nothing to do with what they're there for, but they suddenly think of your space in a different way.
So just want to come back a little bit of feedback there and a few comments. There's loads of really useful information tonight. Thank you so much, Karen. That's fantastic. So one was on outreach. There is a section in the handbook which, you know, just like you were just mentioning, you made a list of all the groups in your town or city. Comes from an old kind of Earth Circus plan we had, where we would go into a town and make a list of as many community and environmental groups as possible. And there's just a general list in the handbook of 50 different kind of groups that you could have, from, you know, vegan groups to women's groups to faith groups to farmers groups to whatever it is, and reach out and contact as many as possible and say, you know, we're thinking of set up a centre, or we've got a centre, would you like to get involved? You know, this really is about bringing a wider alliance of groups together in each town and city, and even not just one building, but intelligently reusing the empty building infrastructure around our towns and cities. And, you know, it's really important to reach out, and you do find some of the Zooms, you know, at the beginning introduction, we've had 20 to 30, 35 groups in the Durham one coming together and meeting. And I think Durham are opening up soon in the next couple of months. They've been getting quite a bit of help from the council. So it's really good to outreach to as many groups as you can and try and get them involved and see if they can help and things. And half the groups in town know each other already. They've been going to similar meetings and actions and campaigns or whatever. But the other half, you suddenly realise, wow, I didn't know there was this repair cafe, that bike thing, this women's group, that, you know, whatever it is, getting together. And I suppose the other one on getting a building or not, I mean, I'm a firm believer in physical spaces and people having them there, but there is, you know, some groups have said when they set up, shall we work with an existing legal entity, like shall we partner with Transition Town or a Friends of the Earth group, or a group that's already got a not-for-profit or a charity and we can use them to get a building, or a group that's already got a building. These are things for every group to weigh up and see what they can, if they're going to work with other groups, get some agreements in place about how they could work together and things. But you know, having the physical space brings people and groups and projects out of the woodwork, and so many of our communities suffer from not having a physical space to meet that isn't expensive. You know, great sliding scale policy there you've got there on funding and stuff, but having those spaces means people can meet, plan events, have socials, you know, cafes, make actions and events and things happen. I think the old phrase, you can't paint a 30-foot banner in your mum's front room. We need space in all our communities to make things happen. And it is a, you know, it's a project accelerator, a campaign accelerator when you have physical space. And just from the list of things you went through there on your talk was absolutely phenomenal. The number of groups that have come through the warehouse over the time that you've got it. And we would like groups longer term to buy back community space, however we can do that. You know, there was a community ownership fund, community share offers. We know some groups that have done that, crowdfunding, whatever it is. It would be really good if spaces weren't just for a meanwhile lease for 6 months, a year or 2 or 3. You know, groups like Lewis and Totnes have got 3-year leases, which is fantastic, but it is a bit moving ever so often and finding the next building. So we hope that in the long term we can transition, like the Birmingham warehouse, to longer term spaces that can help many groups down the community. I think we're coming towards the end, folks. Is there any other quick feedback question or anything there for the Karen and the Birmingham team? Absolutely brilliant knowledge tonight. That's really helped.
I just want to say I would love to hear more about where everybody's at on one occasion. So, I mean, you know, I'm going to suggest this and then I won't be able to make it on the date. But, you know, I just think it would be great if we had one where nobody was the speaker, but we all just said a little bit about what we do. I can shut up because I've done mine. But, you know, I just think that could be a really good way of people learning from each other. It's just a thought.
Let's arrange that. That's a really good idea to mention something like that, big discussion. We have had ones previously where we've had 2 or 3 of the centres people come from the early centres while other ones are setting up and say, these are the learnings, these are the mistakes, this is what we went through. So another bigger one of them where as many groups as possible came and told us about their adventures, their joys, their trials and tribulations, and shared some information and documents with each other. That'd be great. Thank you so much, Karen. I'll hand it over to you for the last word, but really appreciate you coming. That's a really fantastic model. and what you've been doing there. And it's a co-op and a community benefit site is brilliant, and you've helped so many people. So thank you. Over to you for the last word, but thank you very much for coming and sharing your knowledge.
Oh, that's really kind of you. Yeah, that's great. I'm really glad that it's felt useful. If anybody wants to get in touch and ask anything about what we do, I'm really happy to chat. It's probably best to go to thewarehouse.coop, which is our website, which I really should have put on a slide or something. But yeah, thewarehouse.coop, and our contact details are on there, so it's pretty easy to get in touch by phone, old-fashioned way, or by email or social medias. So really nice to meet everybody. Thanks a lot.
I'll pop that in the chat now, and thank you very much. We'll stop the recording now. People sometimes stay around for a little bit and have a chat, but whatever you need to do, if you need to beam off and finish dinner or whatever, thank you so much. Always great wisdom. Next week we have George Marshall, who has been a long-term campaigner for the climate since the very first COP1 climate summit, I believe he went to with some friends. And he's also written some books, and one particularly about how to talk to people who don't agree with you, how to reach out of that environmental bubble and talk to many other people who don't necessarily agree with you. How do we get people cooperating and working together across all spectrums of our society, which is what we need, cooperation on solutions. Thank you very much. I'll stop recording there, and